Everyone talks about the same turn-based RPGs, Persona, Divinity, the Final Fantasy classics. But there's a whole world of criminally underrated games out there that will consume hundreds of hours of your life, if you let them. Some of them are old, some are indie, and some are just weird enough that they slip past most people. These forgotten gems deserve your attention. Monster Sanctuary is what happens when someone takes Pokemon's monster collecting, adds Metroidvania exploration, and layers on a turn-based combat system that's genuinely strategic instead of just spamming your strongest move. You explore a massive interconnected world where monsters give you abilities to reach new areas, double jump, flying, breaking walls, and every new monster you hatch opens up more of the map. It's addictive in a way that makes you stay awake till 4 a.m. The combat is where this game separates itself from every other monster collector. Battles are 3v3, and every monster has a skill tree with multiple build paths. You're not just choosing moves, you're building synergies. One monster might apply shields, another buffs the team every time a shield breaks, and a third deals massive damage based on the number of buffs active. The combos get absurdly deep, and figuring out team compositions that work together is half the fun. What makes this hundreds of hours long is the in-game content. After the story, you unlock harder difficulty modes, randomizer options, and challenge runs that completely change how you approach team building. The PvP mode is surprisingly competitive, and breeding for perfect stats becomes its own obsession. There are over 100 monsters to collect, each with multiple viable builds, and the sheer number of combinations means you can theory craft forever. The main flaw is that the story is forgettable. The plot exists to move you from area to area, but the characters are bland and the writing is safe. The pixel art is charming, but nothing special, and the music is decent, but not memorable. Some late-game encounters can feel like damaged sponges if your team synergy isn't optimized. But if you want a monster collector with actual tactical depth and Metroidvania exploration, Monster Sanctuary is criminally underrated. Atelier Iris 3. Grand Phantasm is the weird middle child of the Atelier series that nobody talks about. And that's a shame because it's one of the most unique JRPGs on the PS2. Unlike the other Atelier games that focus heavily on crafting and time management, this one is more of a traditional JRPG with dungeon crawling, turn-based combat, and a story about alchemists exploring a strange alternate dimension. But the crafting system is still deep, and learning how to create powerful items and equipment becomes essential for tackling the harder optional content. The combat is turn-based with a twist. You can swap between two separate parties mid-battle, creating interesting strategic options where you use one team to set up combos and the other to execute them. Characters have different roles and abilities, and building synergy between your two teams is crucial for surviving the tougher bosses. The item creation system lets you craft consumables, weapons, and accessories that completely change how battles play out, turning a losing fight into an easy win if you prepared properly. What makes this a time sink is the optional content. The main story is maybe 30 to 40 hours, but the post-game dungeons, secret bosses, and completionist crafting can easily triple that. There are hundreds of items to create, each requiring specific materials found in specific dungeons, and optimizing your gear for the hardest challenges becomes its own obsession. The game also has a raid system where you tackle procedurally generated dungeons for rare materials, adding a roguelike element to the formula. The downsides are the pacing and the dated presentation. The story is slow to start, the voice acting is hit or miss, and the graphics are very PS2. The dungeon layouts can be repetitive, and the random encounter rate is annoying without the right items to reduce it. But if you want a JRPG with deep crafting, solid turn-based combat, and enough optional content to last months, Atelier Iris 3 is a forgotten gem that deserves another look.
Ultimate move, Rain of Blades!
Fell Seal, Arbiter's Mark, is basically Final Fantasy Tactics for people who wanted more Final Fantasy Tactics. The developers looked at one of the best tactics RPGs ever and made more of it. The result is a game that respects its inspiration while fixing almost every frustrating element of the original. The class system is massive. Over 30 classes with branching paths, each offering unique abilities that can be mixed and matched. You can create a paladin who summons demons, a mage who wears heavy armor, or a support character who controls the battlefield. The depth comes from how abilities interact. You're building synergies that turn your team into a well-oiled machine. Combat is grid-based and turn-based, with elevation, facing, and terrain all playing major roles. The AI is smart, flanking you when possible and targeting your weakest characters. Boss fights are legitimate challenges that require preparation, smart positioning, and understanding enemy abilities. The difficulty modes let you tune the challenge to your preference, from casual to brutally punishing. What makes this a timed sink is the customization and optional content. You can recruit and customize an entire roster of characters, experimenting with different builds and team compositions. The story campaign is solid, but not groundbreaking. Typical fantasy politics and ancient evils. But the post-game content is where the actual challenge begins. Secret classes, optional super bosses, and challenge missions will keep you playing long after the credits roll. The downside is that it plays it safe. The art style is functional but generic, the story is predictable, and the music is decent but forgettable. If you're not into deep tactics gameplay, the hundreds of hours of content won't matter because you'll bounce off in the first few fights. But if you loved FFT and wanted a modern version with more content and fewer frustrations, Fell Seal is exactly what you've been waiting for. Growl Answer 4. Wayfarer of Time is a tactical RPG that most people missed because it got a PSP release in 2012, right when the PSP was dying and nobody was paying attention. This is one of the deepest strategy RPGs ever made, with a branching story that changes dramatically based on your choices, a relationship system that determines character fates, and real-time tactical combat that feels completely unique in the genre. The combat happens in real time on a battlefield where you're issuing commands to characters while enemies move simultaneously. You can pause to give orders, but the flow is faster and more chaotic than traditional turn-based tactics. Positioning, timing, and smart use of abilities determine victory, and the game punishes poor planning instantly. Characters have different movement speeds, attack ranges, and special abilities, and learning how to coordinate your team effectively is essential. What makes this hundreds of hours long is the branching narrative and multiple endings. The story follows a young man caught in a war between nations, and your dialogue choices, mission performance, and relationship building determine how the story unfolds. Characters can permanently die if you fail certain missions, love interests can be locked out based on your choices, and the ending you get depends on dozens of small decisions made throughout the game. The relationship system tracks your interactions with every major character, and maxing out these relationships unlocks new abilities and story events. The downsides are mainly technical. The PSP graphics look dated even for 2012, and the translation can be awkward in places. The real-time combat takes getting used to, and some players will find it too hectic compared to traditional turn-based tactics. The game is also extremely long. A single play through could take 60+ hours, and seeing all the content requires multiple runs. But if you want a tactical RPG with genuine narrative depth and combat that feels fresh, Growl Answer 4 is one of the most underrated strategy games ever made.
Past, when the world was...
Romancing Saga, Minstrel Song is one of the weirdest JRPGs ever made, and that's exactly why it's brilliant. This game doesn't follow the traditional JRPG structure. No linear story, no forced character progression, no hand-holding. You pick one of 8 characters, each with their own goals and storylines. And then you're thrown into an open world where you can tackle quests in any order, recruit different party members, and shape your own adventure. The game doesn't care if you stumble into an in-game boss at level 5. The combat system is the Glimmer system, where characters randomly learn new abilities mid-battle when a light bulb appears over their head. You can't grind levels in the traditional sense. Instead, stats increase semi-randomly based on actions in combat, and enemies scale with your overall progress. This creates a unique rhythm where you're constantly experimenting with different weapons and abilities, hoping to unlock powerful techniques through random chance and smart play. What makes this hundreds of hours long is the sheer amount of content and replayability. Each protagonist has different story events, different recruitable characters, and different paths through the world. Quests can be solved in multiple ways, and the game tracks your choices through a hidden event rank system that determines what content becomes available. You can easily spend 50+ hours on one playthrough and then start a new character to see completely different storylines. The downside is that the game is obtuse as hell. Systems are poorly explained, quests give vague directions, and it's entirely possible to lock yourself out of content without knowing why. The difficulty spikes randomly, and the scaling system can punish you for fighting too much or too little. The graphics and voice acting in the remaster are improved but still feel dated. But if you want a JRPG that treats you like an adult and offers true freedom, this is unlike anything else. Epic Battle Fantasy V started as a Flash game series, and it has no right to be this good. This is a traditional turn-based JRPG that takes every classic mechanic, elemental weaknesses, status effects, equipment optimization, monster catching, and pushes them to absurd extremes. The tone is goofy and self-aware, with characters making meta jokes and references constantly. But underneath the humor is a genuinely deep combat system that rewards experimentation and strategy. The combat is deceptively complex. Enemies have multiple elemental resistances and weaknesses that change based on their current state. Status effects actually matter. Poison, burn, stun, and debuffs can turn impossible fights into easy wins if used correctly. The game has over 200 enemy types, and each one requires different tactics. Boss fights are elaborate puzzles where you have to figure out their patterns, exploit their weaknesses, and adjust your strategy on the fly. What makes this a massive time sink is the completionist nightmare of content. There are 120 different equipment pieces, all with unique stats and abilities. You can capture nearly 150 monsters to use as summons. There are secret optional bosses that make the main story look like a tutorial. The post-game content alone can take 50+ hours if you're trying to max everything out, and the game actively encourages you to keep pushing for better gear and harder challenges. The downsides are the pacing and the tone. The game is long, easily 40+ hours for the main story, and some dungeons drag on forever with repetitive encounters. The humor won't land for everyone, and if you're not into anime-style comedy and fourth wall breaks, you'll be rolling your eyes constantly. But if you want a turn-based JRPG with incredible depth, fair difficulty, and enough content to last months, Epic Battle Fantasy V is one of the most underrated RPGs out there. Unreal World is a survival roguelike set in Iron Age Finland, and it's been in development since 1992, making it one of the longest-running indie games ever made. This is not a power fantasy. You're not saving the world or collecting legendary weapons. You're just trying to survive winter in a harsh, unforgiving wilderness where starvation, exposure, and bandits are constant threats. The turn-based combat is brutal and realistic. One arrow can end your character permanently. And fighting is always a last resort because even winning a fight can leave you injured and bleeding out in the snow. The depth is staggering. You have to hunt, fish, tan hides, build shelters, craft tools, trade with villages, and manage relationships with NPCs and spirits. The game simulates temperature, nutrition, fatigue, and injuries in excruciating detail. You can't just eat meat every day. You need vegetables, grains, and variety, or you'll get sick. Wounds get infected if not treated properly. Winter is genuinely terrifying because food becomes scarce and traveling becomes deadly. What makes this a 100-hour game is the emergent storytelling. Every character you create has a different journey. Maybe you become a legendary hunter. Maybe you settle down and farm. Maybe you get killed by a bear in the first week and have to start over. The world is procedurally generated but feels handcrafted because of how detailed the simulation is. There's no win condition. You just live until you die, and then you start a new life with new goals. The downside is the learning curve. The ASCII graphics and dense UI will scare off anyone looking for a modern experience. The game explains almost nothing, and you'll spend hours reading the wiki just to understand basic mechanics. But if you want a turn-based RPG that respects your intelligence and offers infinite replayability, Unreal World is a masterpiece that's been quietly perfecting itself for over 30 years. Low Magic Age is a love letter to the Infinity Engine CRPGs like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale, but built with modern tools and a focus on brutal tactical combat. This is a game for people who loved planning out every spell slot, memorizing enemy resistances, and spending 20 minutes positioning the party before a single fight. The combat uses real-time with pause, but it's slower and more deliberate than the classics, forcing you to think 3 turns ahead and punishing sloppy play instantly. The campaign is genuinely massive. You're managing a party of custom-created characters through a sprawling story with multiple paths, faction politics, and consequences that ripple across the entire game. The writing is dense and old school, favoring text descriptions over voice acting, and the world is filled with side quests, optional dungeons, and secrets that reward thorough exploration. You can easily spend 80+ hours on a single playthrough, and the different party compositions make replays feel completely fresh. What sets this apart is the build depth. The game uses a classless system where you build characters by investing in skills and attributes, creating weird hybrid builds that shouldn't work but absolutely do. You can make a sneaky mage, a tank who buffs allies, or a summoner who controls the battlefield with minions. The difficulty is punishing, especially on higher settings, and some encounters are straight-up puzzles that require specific strategies to survive. The downsides are rough edges everywhere. The graphics are serviceable but dated. The UI is clunky, and the game assumes you already know how these systems work. Some quests are obtuse, requiring you to explore every inch of the map to find the next trigger. The voice acting is minimal, and the presentation lacks the polish of modern CRPGs. But if you want a tactical RPG that respects your intelligence and offers hundreds of hours of strategic depth, Low Magic Age is one of the best modern Infinity Engine tributes out there. Voidspire Tactics looks like a simple indie tactics game, but it's secretly one of the most creative and open-ended RPGs ever made. You control a party of 4 characters in a world where exploration is just as important as combat, and the game gives you tools that most tactics games would never dream of. You can build bridges, break walls, create platforms, freeze water to walk across it, and use teleportation to skip entire sections of dungeons. It's part tactics RPG, part puzzle game, part Metroidvania, and it all works together seamlessly. The class system is where the depth explodes. You can freely switch between 20+ classes at any time, and each class has unique abilities that combine in ridiculous ways. You can create a party of all mages, all thieves, or a hybrid mess that somehow works. Combat is grid-based and turn-based, but the environmental interactions make every fight different. You can push enemies into lava, freeze them and shatter them, or use stealth to position before combat even starts. What makes this a timed sink is the exploration. The world is filled with secrets, hidden passages, optional bosses, puzzles that require specific class abilities to solve. You'll find new classes by exploring instead of through story progression, which encourages you to backtrack and experiment. The game respects your intelligence by never holding your hand, and figuring out how to reach a distant treasure chest feels like solving a logic puzzle. The flaws are mainly presentation. The graphics are basic, the story is minimal, and the music is forgettable. Some puzzles are obtuse to the point of needing a guide, and the difficulty spikes randomly if you wander into high-level areas too early. But if you want a tactics RPG that treats exploration and creativity as core mechanics instead of afterthoughts, Voidspire Tactics is a hidden gem that will consume you for weeks.